who are joining today for your interest in our topic on PTFE regulations and alternatives. I'll present today's webinar in 3 segments. First, I will talk about PTFE additives as an overview in terms of their chemistry, their performance, and importantly, how they're manufactured, because this ties into the second bullet, which is the regulatory landscape. So it's full of acronyms and complicated structural requirements, but we'll keep it kind of light so you'll get the key points that are relevant to you as a formulator of paints, inks, or coatings. And then lastly, we will talk about some of our PTFE-free technologies and share the performance data of those approaches. So that will involve both composite and nanocomposite powders that we've developed, and also a natural wax that actually has quite good performance compared to PTFE. So briefly, if you don't know who Micropowders is, we're 50 years old this year, and we are a global supplier of coating additive powders, dispersions, and emulsions. I'm speaking to you today from beautiful Tarrytown, New York, which is just north of New York City on the Hudson River. And our company focuses strictly on waxes and surface additive technology. And we believe our portfolio is the largest in the industry to solve problems like surface protection and durability, water repellency and water beading, loss reduction and matting, texturing and haptics, and even anti-corrosion. So why are we talking about PTFE today? PTFE, in case you don't know, is polytetrafluoroethylene. And PTFE powders have decades of history in the coatings area as an additive to improve surface performance. And why is that? Why is it such an important material for many decades? Well, PTFE is a very unique material. So firstly, a very high melting point, over 316C. That's very high. Typically, you never reach those temperatures in any kind of a coating operation. And secondly, also very important is the very low surface energy of PTFE, 18 dynes per centimeter. High melting and very slippery material. So as far as performance, when you use it as an additive in a coating, what does PTFE give you as a micronized powder? So certainly from that low COF of the PTFE, you get high surface lubricity. It's known for that. You get excellent scratch resistance and also abrasion resistance in your coating. The material, since it's got such a high melting point, can give you heat resistance, and PTFE is known to be very chemically resistant. And lastly, you can also get anti-blocking performance by using PTFE additives. So PTFE additives are available in several different forms. So firstly, you can buy micronized PTFE as a 100% PTFE powder. So those have been around for a long time. But there are many other products that are combination grades where you take PTFE and combine it with polyethylene or other types of waxy materials. And these combination grades can give you better efficiency by bringing the PTFE more efficiently to the surface of your coating. So let's talk about how PTFE is manufactured. So if you have virgin PTFE, this is polymerized and it's a very high molecular weight material. So if anybody out there has ever done any plumbing work and you know what plumber's tape is like, it's very stretchy, it's not brittle at all. This is basically virgin PTFE, very stretchy, rubbery material. And you're never going to be able to take that and convert it into a very fine powder. So in order to take that virgin PTFE and reduce it in size to a small particle, you have to basically break down the molecular weight of that virgin PTFE to embrittle the polymer. Typically, you'll take the molecular weight down to, say, 25 to 50,000 molecular weight. And typically, for most suppliers, this has been done by using electron beam irradiation. So you take the virgin PTFE and you run it through a process where you irradiate it, and basically you're chopping those high molecular weight chains down into lower molecular weight fragments, if you will. So it was learned several years ago that during this electron beam irradiation process where you're chopping these chains down, you can inadvertently chop small pieces of the PTFE as part of that process. And one of these byproducts was found to be perfluorooctanoic acid, and the acronym is PFOA. So here's the PFOA molecule, 8-chain C8 fluorinated surfactant. PFOA is well known as a toxic and a very persistent molecule in the environment. And PFOA is in the class of what they call now forever chemicals. So these are chemicals that if they get into the environment, they stay there forever. They don't biodegrade, they don't decompose, they're there for good. So the European Union was the first to look at PFOA and regulate PFOA in the industrial world. This started in 2017, where they proposed to regulate not only PFOA, but salts of PFOA and related small fluorine molecule substances under Annex 17 of REACH. And the first proposal, 2017/1000, made the proposal to limit PFOA content to less than 25 parts per billion and PFOA-related substances to less than 100 parts per billion. And then later, the regulations were amended slightly, but basically the driving point was still the same. 25 parts per billion is what you need to achieve to comply. So meanwhile, the Stockholm Convention, which is a much larger group of countries, obviously, than the European Union, was also looking at PFOA. And under their Persistent Organic Pollutants Initiative, they published their own guidelines on understanding PFOA content and related compounds and controlling that, regulating that. So in 2019, in the EU, 2019/21 was enacted, and that took effect on July 4th of 2020, and that was the first regulation on the books regulating PFOA and related materials. In terms of people who are members of the Stockholm Convention that aren't part of the EU, other countries are putting in their own regulations based on the Stockholm Convention POP recommendations. So what was the industry's response? So anyone who was making a PTFE-based material had to figure out how they were going to comply with this new regulation. So one approach was to take existing products that were manufactured and use some sort of post-treatment processing to make sure that trace levels of PFOA were below that 25 ppb limit. Another approach was to use alternate feedstocks before they are micronized and size reduced that essentially eliminate detectable PFOA. So rather than using electron beam to break down the polymer, you can use thermally degraded PTFE, which generates typically not detectable levels of PFOA. So that was one approach to take, is to move from electron beam irradiation to thermally degraded PTFE. The other approach, which is more complicated, is to actually purpose make the low molecular weight PTFE. Rather than starting with a high molecular weight material, you build a 25 to 30,000 molecular weight PTFE polymer, and then that will have the brittle properties that you would need to size reduce it into a fine powder. So if we go back a second, so this is where we are right now. So we have the European regulation in effect. We have certain Stockholm Convention countries with their own regulations. Currently, the U.S. the U.S. is not a member of the Stockholm Convention, so the U.S. doesn't have any regulations in place yet on PFOA. But certainly, a lot of multinationals follow the lead of the European regulations and want to comply globally, but certainly not all customers. But then we had a new development regarding a new acronym called PFAS. This was in 2021. So 5 European Union countries notified ECHA that they were going to take a much broader look at fluorinated materials. So they're calling these PFAS substances. And this list of materials that they want to study and consider regulating is 6,000 materials. So it's much broader than the initiative I described earlier, which was basically limited to PFOA and similar small molecules. Now, at the same time, the U.S. Doesn't want to be left out of the discussion, so they, under EPA, are publishing a proposed rule also for PFAS substances under the jurisdiction of TSCA. So what are PFAS? So a new acronym. So PFAS is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. The second bullet describes the chemical subtleties of structural units required to be considered a PFAS, and I'm not going to belabor those, but to point out the third bullet, that fluoropolymers under that definition would be considered a PFAS substance under both the EU and EPA definitions. And PTFE, of course, is a fluoropolymer. So it's important to make a distinction between polymer and non-polymer PFAS. So non-polymeric PFAS substances like PFOA are clearly ecotoxic, materials of concern, things that we want to have regulated, control, limited. But on the other hand, polymeric PFAS substances like fluoropolymers, like PTFE, they don't typically exhibit those nasty environmental and toxicological properties. So it's a little unfair to group the polymer and the non-polymer materials together. So as it's currently written, PTFE would be included in that class described as a PFAS, which, as I said, is under study by both the US and the European Union. But again, PTFE has a long history of safe use in many areas, not only industrial, but medical articles, food articles. You can still buy very safe PTFE-coated pans, which no longer, years ago, they actually used PFOA to make the PTFE, and they don't do that anymore. So there are absolutely safe uses for PTFE in food contact, in medical articles. So really the main regulatory focus with this new PFAS initiative is really with the monomeric, or the small molecule substances, and not the high molecular weight polymers like PTFE. So one of the proposals by some subgroups is to kind of split the two arguments apart. So differentiate the polymeric PFASs from the non-polymerics because of their dramatic differences in ecotoxicity and physiochemical behavior. So these activities continue on both sides of the Atlantic, and as with any regulation that's under development, the final results and what we'll have to comply with are unknown. So where does this leave us as formulators of paints, inks, and coatings? So customers who have used PTFE-based additives for food-related end uses seem to be moving away from PTFE. So things like interior can and container coatings, graphic arts packaging, especially food packaging, these types of uses where there is food associated with the PTFE, it makes sense for those customers to start thinking about PTFE-free options. But on the other hand, PTFE is used in many other applications that aren't related to food, and these customers continue to use PTFE-based additives without concern. I think that's a fair decision. But for those end users where PTFE is no longer preferred, we need to figure out what we can replace it with. So additive suppliers have been working to develop new products that are PTFE-free, but you want to provide the same end use performance as PTFE. And I talked about lubricity, scratch, abrasion, high melting point. And Micropettis has been developing PTFE replacement products for about the last 5 years. So this is part 3 of the presentation, where I'm going to talk about our 3 PTFE replacement technologies. The first is a composite powder based on wax and ceramic. And this PTFE replacement concept is mainly to improve abrasion resistance. The second technology is a nanocomposite powder based on wax and aluminum oxide. And this one particularly improves scratch resistance. And then thirdly, I'm going to talk about a natural wax powder based on rice bran wax, which actually has quite good abrasion resistance. And I'll show you data for all 3 of these technologies. So let's talk about our wax composite technology. So a composite wax is a material where you combine 2 or more components in an extrusion or a melt mixing process to form a composite material. Once you form that composite material, then you micronize that composite to your precise particle size specifications. And the result is a wax powder with unique performance features that you do not get by just mixing dry powders together. You get very different performance. And the classic example, there's many products on the market from us and others, is a polyethylene PTFE composite powder. So if you want to try and visualize what this composite particle looks like, we use scanning electron microscopy so you can see the actual wax particles. And then we use energy dispersive X-ray microanalysis, or EDX, so you can kind of map the elemental landscape of the particle. So by combining these techniques, it allows you to visualize what we're trying to describe with regards to these composite particles. So here is an SEM EDX image. This is a polyethylene PTFE powder, composite powder. So you see the large gray domains, those are the wax particles. You see the blue dots, that is fluorine being sensed from the PTFE by the EDX. So you can see that each particle contains both polyethylene and PTFE. And in the case of our product, since it's melted before it's made into this particle, the polyethylene is throughout the particle. It's not just on the surface of the particle. So if you wear away that particle, you continue to expose both polyethylene and PTFE. So why are we making these composites? The first is to optimize the wax particle density. And why is that important? You want the wax to get to the surface as easily as possible. So lighter waxes are more efficient. So PTFE has a density of 2.2, so it's not very light. So if you can combine PTFE with a density of 2.2 with polyethylene with a density of, say, 0.95, you get a lighter composite particle that gets to the surface more efficiently. And any particle not at the surface is basically wasted in your coating. You can also use composites to overcome stability issues. So, for example, polypropylene, which has a density of 0.89, that's quite light. And in a water-based system, a polypropylene particle will want to float. If you can add a densifying agent to make that particle heavier, to make the density of the particle over 1, which is the density of water, you can improve the stability of a lighter wax in a water-based or an energy-curable system. But really the most important thing is we want to get the high-performance material to the coating surface. So PTFE is a high-performance material, so putting with a lighter wax gets more PTFE to the surface and gets more of that great durability performance of the PTFE. So the question we have is, what other materials can we use in place of PTFE in composites to give good surface durability, good surface performance? So that was the technology objective: replace PTFE with other durable materials. And the two examples we're going to present are ceramic, which, as I said earlier, improves abrasion resistance primarily, and aluminum oxide, which is especially good for improving scratch resistance. And we do have data showing that, let's say you have a formula right now with free aluminum oxide in it. If you put the aluminum oxide in a wax particle, you get better performance because the wax is bringing the aluminum oxide to the surface more efficiently. We've demonstrated that and proven that. So the composite approach with these high durability materials actually makes those particles come to the surface more, you get better performance. But we're not going to go into that, but we have that information if it's interesting to you. So let's start with polyglide 1226XF. So this is a composite of high density polyethylene and two types of ceramic microspheres and nanoceramic platelets. So ceramic is a very hard material, Mohs hardness of 7. The ceramic has a small particle size, and ceramic has very good heat and chemical resistance. So this product is designed as a very small particle, so about 4 micron mean, 15 microns maximum. This allows it to be used in a lot of end applications, thin film coatings where you don't want to affect the gloss too much. The melting point of this product is based on the high density polyethylene, so it's about 112C. The density is 0.99, so that's pretty good. So that's a good density to get the particle up to the surface efficiently. And typically for almost all of our high performance additives, you're dosing 0.5%, 1%, maybe 1.5%. So the benefits of polyglide 1226XF, you get excellent surface slip and lubricity from the high density polyethylene component. The ultrafine particle size is good for high gloss or thin film applications. The density is good for in-can stability. This product has broad FDA compliance, but primarily it's a ceramic fortification that greatly improves abrasion resistance. And we will demonstrate that with Tabor abrasion testing. So here is Tabor abrasion resistance results, 2,500 cycles, and we're looking at weight loss. So the less weight removed after 2,500 cycles, the better. On the right, this is a hard urethane coating with no wax additive. We removed 42 milligrams. Next to that is just a micronized high-density polyethylene powder. It's better at 34 micrograms. Next to that is a low-density polyethylene PTFE composite powder. So there's your PTFE, and it's better than the high-density polyethylene, so 30 milligrams. But on the left, polyglide 1226XF, PTFE-free, high-density polyethylene ceramic composite powder, the best, 27 milligrams of weight loss in the Tabor abrasion test. So in summary, the improvement over the PTFE composite powder is about 10%. You get similar lubricity or COF. And Polyglide 1226XF is recommended for candy container coatings, graphic arts, inks, and varnishes for consumer packaging, especially food packaging, high gloss industrial OEM finishes on things like metal, plastic, and wood. So now we're going to go from wax composite technology to wax nanocomposite technology. So it's the same concept and manufacturing process that I just showed you, except one of the components is a nanomaterial. So the nanomaterial has a submicron particle size, but the material we're talking about here is not in the, I'll call it the regulated nano territory. So most nanomaterial regulations are talking about materials with a particle size below 100 nanometers. So we're not in the true regulatory nano range, but these are definitely particles below 1 micron. And the problem with working with nanomaterials are pretty well known that nanoparticles are extremely difficult to wet and disperse if you want to put it directly into your coating. They're dusty and difficult to handle. Nanomaterials have been associated with health effects if they're breathed in the lab or in the plant environment. So by putting the nanomaterial inside a composite wax powder, we eliminate all these issues. So right now we have a portfolio of 4 products based on our aluminum oxide nanocomposite or AL range. And each of them has different types of waxes depending on what your coating is intended to do. And we'll go through all 4 of those. And for each of those, we're going to demonstrate the scratch resistance compared to PTFE-based powders, 1% dosage in a water-based coating applied to an aluminum panel. And we're going to measure scratch resistance using a Tabor linear abrasive, which basically is pencil hardness. That's what a pencil hardness test looks like. It's pretty simple. You have different pencils with different lead hardness, and you try to scratch the surface until you damage the surface, and then you use the scale of pencil lead hardness to categorize your pencil hardness rating. So let's start with MPP-611AL. This is high-density polyethylene aluminum oxide nanocomposite. Again, we're going for small particle size here, so it's good for thin film coatings. And here you're getting scratch and abrasion resistance with lubricity and slip. So we're going to compare the scratch resistance of MPP-611AL with just a high-density polyethylene powder. So basically the same particle as this without the alumina, and we're going to compare it to a polyethylene PTFE composite powder. So here's that pencil scratch results. This is a soft PEG in this example, so the controller has a pencil scratch rating of 8B. 1% high-density polyethylene improves that to a 5B. 1% of the high-density polyethylene PTFE powder improves that still to a 3B. But then if you take the 5B example, the 1% high-density polyethylene powder, but you put the aluminum oxide inside the wax particle, you get that top bar, 1% MPP-611AL, and you improve from a 3B with the PTFE-based material to a B. You improve from a 5B with just the polyethylene powder to a B with the polyethylene alumina composite powder. Our next product is MPP-123AL. This is low-density polyethylene. The first was high-density. This one's a little bit coarser because it's typically used more for non-slip surfaces where they don't need that fine particle size. And low-density polyethylene is tougher than high-density polyethylene. So if you need a more tougher surface performance, MPP-123AL is very good. Things like floor coatings, for example. And again, we're going to compare performance in scratch to the straight LDPE powder and then an LDPE PTFE composite. Again, soft PEG control is 8B. 1% of LDPE powder improves to a B. In this study, the LDPE PTFE powder has the same result as a B, which is a B. But MPP-123AL, so that's LDPE alumina, best results with an F pencil scratch hardness rating. Third product is MicroClear 418AL. This is carnauba wax with the aluminum oxide inside the wax particle. Slightly larger particle size than some of the very fine ones, but still small enough for most thin film coatings. With carnauba wax, you get good clarity, you get good slip, and you're getting certainly the scratch resistance from the aluminum oxide. And certainly, MicroClear 418AL is based on carnauba wax, which is a natural and biodegradable wax. And a lot of customers are interested in more natural bio content. So that was another reason for having this product. And here we're going to compare just the micronized carnauba wax powder. So again, control 8B, 1% of carnauba wax powder improves the pencil scratch hardness to a 4B. Put the aluminum oxide inside that carnauba wax particle, you get microclear 418 AL, improves from a 4B to an HB. And the last and newest in our AL range is SuperSlip 6515 AL, high density polyethylene amide wax and alumina. So we've added amide wax to one of the previous products. Again, small particle size, which is good for most end uses. The amide wax is good for anti-blocking and also surface haptics. So if you want good scratch resistance on, say, a kitchen cabinet where the feel of the coating is important, this is an interesting product to consider. And in this case, we're going to look at the results again versus the composite without the alumina. Here are those results. So we're looking at pencil scratch hardness again, no wax. This is a hard urethane in this example. No wax, 4B. 1% of high-density polyethylene amide wax improves to a 3B. 1% of high-density polyethylene PTFE, that improves to a B. And we get equal performance, in this case, to the PTFE-based product with SuperSlip 6515 AL. High-density polyethylene amide aluminum oxide, so equal to a PTFE-based additive. We also can look at table abrasion resistance with this product. And in the middle, you can see a HDPE PTFE powder. These have been used for decades as among the most high-performance additives for things like abrasion resistance. But on the left, SuperSlip 6515 AL, PTFE-free, better than the PTFE-containing composite in the middle. So summarizing the AL grade, we show scratch resistance superior to, in most cases, or at least equal to their PTFE-based counterparts. And there's different product choices depending if you want a high slip surface, a low slip surface, if natural wax content's important to you, if you want anti-blocking, if you want those surface haptic effects. So depending on what kind of coating you're working on, we can recommend the best choice in the AL additives family. So I am going to show you the data that I talked about before about if you're putting free aluminum oxide inside your formula, and that's been done for many years in things like high-end floor finishes. But we're going to show you that by putting aluminum oxide inside the wax particle, you get more of those particles to the surface. You get better performance. So here, control pencil scratch hardness, soft PUD, control is 8B. 1% of low-density polyethylene powder, we improve the scratch to a 6B. If we directly dose X% of free aluminum oxide into the coating, we also get a 6B performance. However, if we take that X% of aluminum oxide and put it inside a wax particle, so we're dosing 1% of MPP 123AL at the top, which contains X% of aluminum oxide, look at the improvement in performance. So the blue and the green bars, the formula contains the same amount of aluminum oxide, but in the green bar, the aluminum oxide is in a buoyant wax particle, getting to the surface more efficiently, giving you better performance, better scratch resistance. Particles not at the surface are wasted. So what about natural waxes? And there seems to be quite a surge in interest in natural waxes, natural everything in our world of paintings and coatings. Sustainability, certainly many organizations have sustainability initiatives, renewability, biodegradability, and there's a lot of grades of industrial waxes that have been sold for decades that have very good performance that are in the natural family. So things like carnauba wax are microclear grades, are naturally based biodegradable carnauba. We have some other products that are newer, and I'm not going to talk about all of them, I just want to mention them briefly. So we have Nature Matte 31. This is based on a bioferment PHBV for matting and burnish resistance. We have Naturefine H325. This is based on hydrogenated castor oil for surface slip and rub resistance. We have Naturefine R331 micronized rice bran wax powder, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. And lastly, we just recently launched Aquabead R331E. This is a rice bran wax emulsion for very high water repellency, and actually very good surface performance. But let's talk about the one product that's relevant to the PTFE replacement discussion, and that's NatureFine R331. So it's micronized rice bran wax. And rice bran wax is extracted from the rice husks that you get when you convert brown rice into white rice. So this is really a food waste product that's being repurposed into a useful raw material. And the nice thing about that is you're not taking a food resource and repurposing it as an industrial additive. You're taking a food waste stream and reusing it. And actually, what you're doing is you're upcycling. So upcycling is a kind of a new term, but you're taking something that was considered a waste and improving it into a useful raw material. So it doesn't compete with food resources, like I said. Rice bran wax is fully natural, very sustainable and renewable. And on top of it all, it's also freshwater biodegradable under OECD 302. And we have the data for that if you're interested in seeing the data on the biodegradability of our rice bran wax. But let's talk about the product. So the particle size about 8 microns, maximum 31 microns. The melting point of natural waxes tends to be lower than synthetic waxes, so it's about 80 C, density 0.96, and dosage 1 to 3% perhaps. So with NatureFine R331, you're getting certainly a natural, biodegradable, and sustainable additive option with very broad FDA compliance. In fact, rice bran wax powder is a direct food additive because when you eat brown rice, you're eating rice bran wax. But the material is very lubricious with excellent abrasion resistance. And we're going to show you the Tabor abrasion results versus some synthetic powders, including PTFE-based powders. So here we are again with our Tabor abrasion resistant 2,500 cycles, 1% in a hard urethane coating. We're looking at weight loss. No wax, 42 milligrams removed. The next bar, high density polyethylene PTFE is better. Polypropylene in the very middle, also micronized polypropylene, is pretty good. That improves. Further on, the low density polyethylene PTFE, better still, 28 milligrams removed. But all the way on the left is NatureFine R331, micronized rice bran wax. Best of all of these additives, 25 milligrams of coating and removed in a Tabor test. So in summary, it actually has about 11% better Tabor resistance than the best synthetic, in this case PTFE-based composite powder. You get similar lubricity versus a high-density polyethylene PTFE powder. It's 100% renewable, and people are now starting to talk about a renewable carbon index, or RCI. And this material has an RCI of 100%. It comes straight from the plant. It's extracted and purified with food-grade ethanol, for that matter. So there's no harmful solvents used in the processing. Sustainable and renewable, upcycled from food manufacturing waste, and freshwater biodegradable. So I'd like to make some conclusions, and anyone in the paints, inks, and coatings world knows that regulations are always changing, always coming up, always morphing. So we always have to keep up with what's happening and kind of think ahead a little bit. And at Micropowders, we feel that PTFE additive powders are still an excellent and high-performance option for improving the surface properties of coatings. But if there's end uses where it makes sense to move away from PTFE, there are several alternative products that we've developed that offer, in most cases, superior, if not equal performance, including natural options. And at Micropowders, we will continue to develop innovative products that will meet the challenges of the future. So that ends my presentation, and I thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.